Well, if you've been following the news recently, I'm sure you'll be aware that the role that insurance is going to play in managing the impact of climate risk is going to increase rapidly, driven by regulation and reporting requirements around the world. Here in the UK, the Bank of England last week released its stress test for 3 different future scenarios related to increase in temperatures of 1.8 degrees Celsius to 3.3 degrees Celsius by 2050. And then this week, the leaders at the G7 summit issued a statement committing the participating countries to move towards mandatory climate-related financial disclosures that provide consistent and decision-useful information for market participants. Now, we've seen the emergence of many new companies joining the established providers of data and analytics for underwriting purposes and covered many of them in our location intelligence report. This increasing focus on the measurement and hence the need for tools and data related to climate change and business risk looking into the future is opening up a significant new area of opportunity for both established and new companies. So this week I am talking to Utge Royo, one of the co-founders of Tesselo. Tesselo is already helping forestry owners, utilities and investment funds understand and manage changes in the nature and size of forests and trees. Now, recently, a member of the current cohort in the Lloyd's lab, Marine and her colleagues have been exploring the potential insurance applications for their analytics. Well, if you're interested in what the future will look like related to the issues of climate risk management, carbon sequestration, trading, or just what it means to be in the Lloyd's lab and explore a new business line in insurance, this one's for you. I'm Matthew Grant, partner at InsTech London. Hang in to the end or find out what we're up to at our webpage, www.instech.london, if you're curious about how we may be able to help you, whether you are an insurer, technology investor, or anyone else interested in innovation in insurance and risk management. Marine, really interested in hearing what you've got to talk about. You are one of the recent Lloyd's cohorts. Going to be talking a bit more about that in a minute. You're currently Chief Strategy Officer and also one of the co-founders of Tesselo, which you founded back in 2017. I should also mention you are based in Portugal, so I think all of your experience with the lab so far has been remotely. But can you just build on that a bit more and talk about what it actually means to help organizations manage resources effectively?
We are talking about land resources, so forest, vegetation, crops and soil, whatever grows, that are at the same time the symptoms and the solution to tackle climate change. So we work with industrial and non-industrial clients. These resources are vital for life and economy. We will always need to manage them, but we need to do it in a more efficient and sustainable way. So, for example, we monitor plants' health to maximize their life cycle, to detect threats, so the forest owners or farmers can act on time to protect their crop or the forest in case of a pest attack, for example. We also monitor environmental criteria such as biodiversity index. We measure biomass. We measure carbon sequestration potential in forests. We also ensure compliance to environmental regulation because it's part of the global protection. So we look at tree species distribution. We can issue alert of in case of when we detect deforestation. We measure distance between forest and infrastructure, for example.
A lot of interest is now in the impacts or future impacts of climate change becoming more of a regulatory requirement. I noticed that you've changed your job title from Chief Sustainability Officer to Chief Strategy Officer. Just interesting why you've done that, and quite intrigued what was the role of Chief Sustainability Officer.
We have created the role of Chief Sustainability to make sure that we stay true to our initial mission, which is accelerating the transition to environmental sustainability. Our technology is neutral. We have decided to leverage it for environmental impact and at the same time make a business out of it. To decide that someone is going to be in charge of making sure we are keeping the right direction and make the right decision says a lot about our commitment. But then we decided that actually sustainability is part of the general strategy of the company. So I keep this role, but now it's directly incorporated into other types of strategic decision, of course, alongside the CEO, Rémi Charpentier, which is thinking about funding, thinking about the markets of tomorrow.
I know you do have some clients today, which is excellent. Can you just talk about some of the types of companies you work with? Maybe if you can name some names outside of insurance, because as I said earlier, one of the interesting things about what you've been doing is you've been working with other organizations and are now looking for applications for that within insurance.
Exactly. So we are not working with insurance companies yet. Our two current markets are forestry and infrastructure. So same technology, but with different applications. In the forestry sector, we work with all the forest stakeholders, from mainly timber producers, but also investment funds that sell carbon sequestration bonds, but also governments, NGOs that launch reforestation or afforestation projects. And in the infrastructure sector, mainly with electricity transporters at the moment and distributors, but basically any kind of asset manager that want to monitor the environmental threats around their infrastructure.
For those people that are not familiar with carbon sequestration bonds, can you explain how those work?
The basic idea is that any entity, any public, private, governmental, etc., can measure its carbon footprint and decide to offset it. Sometimes it's regulatory, it's mandatory. Some other times it's made on a voluntary basis. But the carbon market is growing very fast. So forests are one of the most efficient way to offset carbon footprint because trees sequestrate carbon. So for that, it's necessary to have a tool that ensures that the asset, the tree, is actually still alive and still delivering the carbon capacity it has been assigned. So, for example, we work with Livelihood. It's one of the biggest carbon investment fund in France. And we monitor their plantation in Indonesia to make sure that they are still alive. They haven't been deforested. They haven't been damaged by a pest attack or anything. And so first step is, are the trees still alive? And second step, of course, is to measure their capacity of carbon sequestration, because there is no one single methodology. It's actually a very complex science based on environmental science, but also climatic criteria of the region.
That's really interesting. So from the asset manager's point of view, you're essentially helping them validate that what they've invested in, or the bond they're investing in or trading, is based on robust original forests in your case. And also sounds like you are starting to create some kind of indices or consistent measures that people can use to trade.
Yes, exactly.
And then on the infrastructure side, can you just talk a little bit more about how you're helping companies there?
Yes, so I'll give you maybe a concrete example. We are working with electricity transporters and distributors. We help them optimize the vegetation management around their grid. A lot of these electric grids, of course, stretch over forested areas or just vegetated areas. And the asset managers need to ensure they have to respect regulation when it comes to distance between vegetation and power line. But of course, they want to trim vegetation in the most respectful way. The idea is not to go deforest 2 kilometers around the grid. What we do is, because we are using open data, we are able to work at very large scale. So we monitor at all time in a continuous way all the grid at country scale. For example, in Portugal, in Japan, in Ireland, these are the countries we have made projects already. We monitor all the grid all the time, and we issue a risk map because we are able to locate vegetation and forest and to measure its distance to power line. So based on that, the electricity companies can optimize their vegetation management operation and only cut trees when and where it's necessary.
So Marine, can you just talk a little bit specifically so people who aren't familiar with how this would work can understand how a client of yours would work directly with you using your data and getting some actionable insights out of that?
So in a nutshell, they have 3 main objectives: to protect their assets, to optimize their operations, and to comply with environmental regulations. So I'll give you some concrete examples. For protection, we monitor plant health. So we can, for example, we are able to detect early signals of pests infecting a tree or a crop. For the operation, we compute on a weekly or monthly basis the biomass of a given forest, for example. We measure the cut and burnt areas, so we can give them an overview of the past operations, how much wood have been harvested. We can do that by species because we're able to recognize tree species at country scale, or by plantation. And when it comes to regulation, that's an interesting point for insurance, I guess. We are, for example, able to measure distance between infrastructure and vegetation and make sure it's compliant with regulation, or measure any kind of environmental criteria such as biodiversity, type of forest, tree species area, to ensure that species don't invade a determined region.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do these companies pay you to get that kind of information?
Ideally, we want to work on subscription basis. That's how we work with our timber producers clients. They receive a forest inventory updated every month or every semester. For now, in the electricity business, we are still doing ad hoc projects, but we are confident we're going to transform that into a subscription basis, because all the natural change we are monitoring makes sense on a continuous way.
Yeah, plants keep growing and need to be cut back. And you touched on it a bit there, the data, but that, I believe you're using satellite data. I guess that's probably the only way you could do this cost effectively, to be able to monitor the vegetation.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the differentiating factor of Tesselo from our competition. We focus on open data. The environmental change has to be monitored at very large scale, whether it is deforestation, flood risk, fire risk, etc. So we need a cost-effective approach. So what we say is basically the geospatial intelligence, the AI and machine learning that we use and we design ourselves to extract information from the raw data. So we mainly use Sentinel-2, that's a satellite from the European Space Agency that has been specifically designed to monitor plants. So it has 13 bands of imagery, including 10 infrared bands. So it gives us an unbeatable information about the chemical status of the plants. And we also develop our own methodology to make this low to medium resolution more actionable. So we have developed this super resolution model that allows us, for example, to detect the forest from a 10-meter resolution image to downsize it to 1-meter resolution. We use high-resolution imagery that provided by our clients, for example, from a LiDAR campaign. We use that to train a model, and then we run the model on low resolution. And with that, we're able to reduce the resolution from 10 to 1 based on free imagery.
LiDAR, L-I-D-A-R, is a common technique for remote sensing used by aircraft that uses radar to measure the height of land. Back to my next question. So just make sure I understand. So Europeans are providing the data for free, and then so your clients are then providing you with their own more detailed information that they've obtained using LiDAR, is that right? And then you're combining that with the free information.
Exactly. It's a way to offer actually a higher value for money for our clients' data, because a lot of large industries run leader campaign, forest monitoring, vegetation monitoring, grid monitoring, etc. They use it once. It's very expensive to fly a drone or an helicopter over large areas. It's a one shot. So if there is a storm, then half of the information is not accurate anymore, but we don't know exactly which one and where. So it's precision data that's very valuable, but only serves can be updated very quickly. So we reuse this information to make our models more powerful and extract more information from open data.
Yeah, it's very smart. So once you've done that once, as you said, you've trained the model, and then you can go back to your free data going forward.
We train the model once, and then we don't use the high resolution data anymore.
And then let's talk about the Lloyd's lab. Well, congratulations getting in, because I heard recently from Eddie Gaze that there are 177 applications, and you were one of the 11 companies that managed to get selected for that. As we speak, you're currently on the 6th cohort. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Mm-hmm. But what was it that led you to take a look at insurance, moving outside of your traditional client base?
The intuition here was that we now have this tech and environmental knowledge, and we observe there is a market gap. So forests represent 30% of land on this planet, and we also observe the rise of the carbon sequestration market. But all of these trees, all of these assets are vastly uninsured. So there is this market gap we thought we could address by leveraging our tech and this cost-efficient tool to make current insurance products more efficient and also to penetrate the market of parametric insurance.
Okay, so you're very specifically looking at an asset that people have, for various reasons, found too difficult or chosen not to insure. Mm-hmm. You provide them with more data. Now there's some value to that. And presumably, in terms of insurance, what's that, perils for like fire and then windstorm blowing trees down? Are those the main kind of risks that forests suffer from?
Yeah, absolutely. There are storms and fire risk. Then in some areas, drought and pest attack are also important threats. And we think that we can actually add value all along the insurance chain, from underwriting. We have access to all this historic data, not only from Sentinel, but also from other satellites that we use, from Landsat from NASA, for example. So we have the possibility to have, with a neutral and public instrument, to look at the historic of an asset. How many times has this forest burned or been attacked by pests, or has this area been flooded in the past? When it comes to claim monitoring, we think that this tool is also to get an eye on the ground, even though it's not exactly real time, can be a great improvement to sort claim in a more efficient way, to detect fraud, to prioritize claim, etc. Yeah,
that's also very interesting. And have you been doing anything prior to the lab with other insurance companies?
We were in discussion with Descartes Underwriting to see how we could work with parametric insurance. So we think that two possibilities would be fire risk and soil moisture index, which allows to work with flooding risk. So flooding and fire would be our two main use cases.
Well, yeah, so Descartes are well known as one of the leaders in parametric insurance. It's good to know you've had a discussion going on with them. And then just specifically back to the lab, can you explain for people that might not be familiar with how that works? What does it involve being, I guess not literally in the lab, unfortunately, right now, but part of that Lloyd's lab?
Well, I think the main advantage is the great networking opportunity. Lloyd is an amazing brand, recognized, so it opened a lot of doors for us. We had access to companies and specialists that we wouldn't have reached without Lloyd's lab. Even InsTech is actually an introduction through Lloyd's lab. So for us, it's been a great exposure. And because we don't come from the insurance world, it's also an opportunity to get a masterclass on the insurance sector, which again we wouldn't have had without Lloyd's.
And then, can you talk a little bit about some of the companies you've come across in the lab? And I know you've got some specific individuals or companies mentoring you.
We have a group of mentors. They come from TMK, Dale Underwriting, Atrium, Inigo Insurers. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. And thanks to them, they also allowed us to get introduced to Aegis, to Score, to Forestry. So those companies I've mentioned, unfortunately, they are not big on forest insurance and nor parametric insurance. So there is not necessarily a use case to be developed with their respective companies, but they definitely helped us to get the right information and talk to the right people. So now we have a conversation going with forestry specialists, such as Forestry, which is very, very insightful.
I think it's Forestry, isn't it? You mentioned they, the clue is in the name. They are focusing on insurance. Can you just talk a little bit about how they operate? Are they an individual company? Are they a kind of combination of different companies under a single name?
Forestry is part of Globe Underwriting. They are one of the, I think, half a dozen companies in the world that only do forest insurance. So, and they are one of the pioneers on that area.
And what have you found? You mentioned the companies who are mentoring you are not big into forestry, but presumably they're interested in talking to you because they're exploring those areas. A couple of companies you mentioned, Atrium One, I know, are very active in looking for new areas to move into and provide capacity and score as well. So are you starting to see, not necessarily having to name names, but are you seeing some opportunities that are following what you'd hope to learn, that there might be companies that want to do more with forestry because they've now got access to data from companies like yourselves?
We haven't identified a concrete use case because we're still refining and understanding how we should package our data to make it valuable for these insurance companies. Forestry is not a secret; it's a very limited market today, much smaller than crops and agriculture, because forestry insurance are not subsidized in general, except in some specific countries. And of course, they have a very long life cycle compared to crops, so it's a long time risk. What we need to do is to pinpoint the key data that have value for insurers and understand what they miss to complete their risk assessment.
Yeah, I think what they miss, and also just giving them confidence that they can write a bit more. I mean, the benefits, of course, is it's diversified globally, and you said it's kind of long term, and the increased occurrence of wildfires all around the world. You've had them in Portugal, we've had them in Ireland, maybe having them in the UK, and obviously California's had a lot. May well drive people to seek more insurance, and having capacity behind that is very useful. And then just in terms of how, Marine, you're going to market, it can be difficult for companies such as yourselves to sell directly into insurers. Clearly with a lab, you've got that great opportunity to develop connections you can build on. But the other choice people make, or both actually, is to work through some of the organizations that are pulling together third-party data and selling them on to insurance organizations. Have you spoken to any companies like Hazard Hub in the US, or Wenfresh in the UK, Address Cloud, or Gamma in Ireland, that are pulling together multiple sources of data and effectively acting as your front end for your data sources?
It's an excellent point. That would make a lot of sense to go to work through third-party companies. Because we know that currently Tesselo only offers a fraction of the final solution of the big picture, and our information will always be aggregated with other data, at least property, financial information, and most probably other weather data, rain forecast, for example. So it makes a lot of sense to work with companies that already aggregate this data, have multiple sources, and speak the same language as the underwriter or the reinsurers. And also, I'd like to mention parametric company, for example, a Skyline, that's also a Lloyd's alumni. They aggregate data from multiple data sources to build index-based parametric insurance solutions, and that's also the kind of intermediary that makes sense for us to work with and save time, be more efficient, and have a more effective distribution channel.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've got those two groups, and all the companies I mentioned we know very well and very happy to make the introduction. Skyline as well are also one of our members, we know, and I think you've got that. Yeah, on the one hand, you've got the sort of broader access to organizations that might want to use your data for underwriting, and then you've got the more specific but growing fast area of parametric, where people are looking for partners to get access to data. And as you well know, one of the big costs can be trying to get the data itself. And if you've got ways of bringing that data that's at low or no cost and can be the independent party and can validate after a loss, it puts you in a very strong position for the parametric insurance offerings. And Lloyd's itself, actually, we've seen quite a few of the Lloyd's entities putting capacity behind parametric triggers. So yeah, I would be surprised if we weren't talking in a year's time and you actually had some transactions taking place around that.
Hopefully.
And then we're seeing a lot of activity across the market. Most recently here in the UK, the Bank of England has just released its latest stress test for climate change, looking at different scenarios of sort of mitigation or lack of reduction in activities driving the climate change. From your point of view, are you hearing specifically from your clients or any of the insurers you're talking about the value of what you're doing for helping companies measure what they're doing, whether it's through the ESG, environmental, societal governance, or it's to do with the task force for climate financial disclosure? Lots of things happening, but I would have thought that must be quite a significant area for what Tesselo can offer.
Absolutely, yeah. We really want to align our actions more and more with these political frameworks about CSR, about ESG. So generally speaking, yes, what we do for our current clients is linked to their general carbon footprint assessment. Additionally to the vegetation forest monitoring, we have large energy companies, for example, that have a lot of land, and they are suddenly realizing the value of these lands in terms of carbon sequestration and how they could actually incorporate that into their reporting. So they asked us to go beyond the current state of services we are providing them and actually include all these lands in our monitoring to understand how it works, how it changes, and how they could act to improve the environmental performance of these lands too, around their infrastructure, energy plants, for example. So our clients today, no one asks us explicitly to work under the TCFD, for example, but we are confident that's something that's gonna come up in the coming years. We are also in discussion with a UNDP bureau of an African country to help them account for the carbon sequestration of the forest. So at country scale, remote sensing with open data is very useful for countries that are poor, the countries where the national administration doesn't do a very active job on natural resources inventory. So when there is no public data, using open satellite imagery analyzed with AI makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of movement in that area. And I think it's going to get faster and faster, actually, because once people are required to measure things, and they need reliable data to be able to do that. And then once you've measured it one year, you need to be able to measure it again the following year and almost certainly show some improvements. And then a question for you about your existing clients and their view of risk management and insurance. So one of the things we're seeing more broadly across companies is you're looking for ways to use analytics to perform their own risk management or setting up captives as their own insurance companies. It might be too early, but do you see some opportunities with your clients in forestry and infrastructure to go back and help them understand ways to manage their own risks before they actually start talking to insurers?
Yes, and for me, I would say it's an alarm message that we've been passing on to the insurance companies we've been talking to in the past weeks, because a lot of our current clients don't necessarily see insurance as a solution; they see it as a cost. And the first thing timber producers do is to run a cost-benefit analysis to understand if it is in their interest to get insurance, or if they prefer to allocate this budget to prevention measures to actually mitigate their risk. So in Portugal, the majority of the forest, of the industrial forest, is not insured. Why is that? Because the fire risk is in particular, and also other risk, but fire risk is considered very high, so it's driving the premium very high too. And at the end of the day, forest managers prefer to clean the vegetation. They keep a constant eye on their plantation and the health status of their plant and the fire risk instead of paying an insurance. Another example is the investment funds. They are financial bodies, of course, so some of them are actually able and prefer to come up with their own mechanism to compensate potential financial losses than to subscribe to an insurance.
Well, Marina, I've asked you a lot of questions, but is there anything we've missed out that we should be talking about?
Yeah, final comment to build on what I've just said. And I mean, insurance company, there is an insurance gap, a huge one. For example, we think that insurance companies can have a very powerful role of prescriber when it comes to protection of natural resources, if they are able to discriminate good and bad behaviors in the risk pricing. For example, I have timber producers client that told me, if I clean my land, if I make sure that there is no light vegetation prone to turn into a fuel load in case of fire, if I maintain a high biodiversity, etc., I don't get a lower premium. I should pay less because I have reduced my risk, but it's not reflected on the business model of the insurance contract I get. So there is margin on that to refine the risk analysis and give incentive for actually good behaviors prone to mitigate risk.
Final question for me then. So with the lab, you have demo day, which is a chance for everybody to see what you've been up to. What date is that, and what are you planning to show us?
What we want to do is to share a business plan analysis of remote sensing for insurance, and focus it of course on forestry and or natural disaster management. And our goal is to pinpoint the most relevant type of risk or type of information that we can produce and will add value to insurers. And
demo day is what date?
Is on the 7th and 8th of July.
Okay, so the clock is ticking.
Absolutely.
Well, Marina, it's been fascinating. Really interested to hear what you're doing, and as I said, it's always really good to know when people are kind of pushing the boundaries of what is insurable and finding new sources of data, and in your case, finding it at a very cheap way as well, which is kind of what's important when it comes down to the analytics. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, what's the best way to learn?
Reach out to me through LinkedIn, through my email address, marin@tesselo.com, and we'll be always happy to answer any question.
I mean, that was really, really interesting, and best wishes for the rest of the Lloyd's lab, and hopefully, at some point restrictions are going to be lifted and we'll see you back or see you in the UK, or otherwise I'm always looking for excuses to come to Portugal, so maybe we'll hunt you down in Lisbon as well.
Great, we'll have a Porto.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, thanks a lot for having me.
Look out for a lot more on this topic from us, and if you're interested in climate risk, you can hear my discussion with some of the leading experts from our event that we'd held with RIASC, Lloyd's, NASDAQ and others on the 20th of April. Go to our website and look under the events tab to find that. Now, if you enjoyed this podcast and haven't already discovered our other 140 or so episodes, do take a look at our podcast page on www.instech.london for the back catalogue. All the interview write-ups are there too. We're working with over 120 technology companies and insurers these days, helping explain the world of innovation and sharing your stories. So if you're interested in learning more about how we can help you, please do contact me, Matthew Grant, via LinkedIn or any of us, hello@instech.london.